Hello and welcome to another special lockdown episode of Material Matters with me, Grant Gibson. As regular listeners will know, the idea behind the show is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. However, once in a while, I jettison this self-imposed format and chat with someone who possesses an overview of the design world. Today, it gives me huge pleasure to talk to Sheridan Coakley. The entrepreneur cut his teeth as a modern furniture dealer before founding SCP, or Sheridan Coakley Products, in London's Shoreditch in 1985. The manufacturer and retailer burst on the nascent British contemporary design scene with pieces by Jasper, Morrison and Matthew Hilton. In 1991, it produced the latter's Balzac armchair, which has gone on to become a bona fide classic. Sheridan opened a contract division in 1995 and more recently launched a new store on the Pimlico Road. The roll call of designers he's worked with includes Konstantin Grcic, James Irvine, Michael Marriott, Donna Wilson, Rachel Whiteread and Reiko Kaneko, to name just a handful. He's undoubtedly been one of the most influential figures in British design for the past 35 years. Sheridan, thanks so much for doing this.
You're perfectly welcome. Hello.
Did I get everything right?
Yes, you probably know the dates better than I do. I've got a timeline. I printed off an old timeline we did for an exhibition once just to double check that I get the dates right.
Good. Well, I nicked them all off your website, so I'm hoping they're right.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this podcast kind of isn't about the virus. We're trying to distract people from it to get away from some of the more disturbing headlines that we're seeing. But we can't really ignore it by the same token. So can we talk about how it's affected your business and how you're coping?
Like all retail stores, we had to shut the day that the government enforced the lockdown. Our retail business has kind of virtually disappeared. We had to furlough all our retail staff. The store is still there, and we're kind of using it as a kind of base to partly deal with our web sales, which inevitably, like most people have websites, business has increased, and as a place where we're still getting deliveries and so we're kind of still functioning on that level. The upholstery factory had to close immediately for a couple of reasons, I suppose. Partly because of there was a kind of general panic about how one should work and should one work, and also that our suppliers started to not be able to work also. But we're starting to open up again next week. We've readjusted the whole factory layout. Staff are being trained to work in a different way.
Right.
Everybody has their own tools, so it's a pretty safe. It was a pretty safe environment anyway, and hopefully they're going to get back into production next week to make the orders that we have. But yeah, I mean, it's had a massive effect. I mean, I would suspect our business has been halved,
right,
and probably will be for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
So where are you talking from at the moment?
I'm at home in my house in Hampshire, near the Downs, between sort of Winchester and Petersfield, which is very nice, I have to say. Yeah,
because it's quite interesting. You have this, obviously you're living in this kind of rural idyll, and yet your working environment is kind of gritty Shoreditch.
Yeah, but I've always kind of lived that way. I mean, I've always loved the countryside, always wanted to live that kind of life, but at the same time, you know, in a contemporary world. I've been lucky since we moved out of London 25 years ago to be able to do that.
I mean, can we talk a bit about your background, Sheridan? Your father was in bubblegum, right?
He was, yeah.
Yeah. Were you ever tempted into the same business?
Well, I did actually work for him for about 18 months. Actually, my grandfather was kind of an entrepreneur showman, and he was a song plugger and was managed people in the musical business, and so he was always looking for the main chance. And after the war, when my dad was in his early 20s, when sugar rationing came off, he got my father and his brother into making toffee apples. They thought there was suddenly the sugar was available. What can you do? People really wanted sugar. And I don't know how the story was, but I think when my uncle was in America, he met a man who knew something about making bubblegum, and the next thing they know, they'd bought a machine and had opened up a small factory in Cricklewood making bubblegum. And that then kind of grew quite successfully. And they produced picture cards, the kind you get you've got a flat piece of bubble gum with picture cards, usually of footballers or a Batman or the Beatles or something like that. So that was the business they had. And when I was about 19, I went and worked for them for just over a year, running their art department, with no real experience. But I don't know. My father thought that it would be an interesting job for me to do, and I had nothing better to do. And I kind of developed their own art department, whereas before they were using there was an American company they had a license with who produced a lot of these kind of things. And so I did that for about 18 months. Yeah.
And so did you live in Cricklewood, or was that where the factory was?
As a baby, I was brought up in Cricklewood and then moved to Mill Hill, as one did if you got a bit of money. Yeah, so my sort of childhood years were spent in the suburbs of London, which I loved.
Wasn't there an anecdote about those bubblegum cards and Edoardo Palazzi?
Well, yes, the American company we had a license for they produced a line called Nutty Initials, which was peel off stickers of letters of the alphabet, and they were drawn by one of the artists from Mad magazine. And I got a call from Edoardo Palazzi one day, phoned up and saying, could he have a set of the stickers? Because he wanted to use them in an artwork. I was 19. To be honest, I didn't even know who he was. And so I sent him a box, and then he turned up at the factory one day because it happened to be quite near where his silk screeners were in East London, and gave me a huge silk screen, which I've still got, of Who's a Grave. I think it's called Who's Afraid of Sugar Green and Lime Pink. And he signed it, and then he invited me to his retrospective at the Tate, and then I realised who he was.
None of the clippings that I've read about you, Sheridan, talk about your school or education. Were you academic? Did you go to university?
No, I didn't even finish my A-levels. I was a product of a generation that thought that if you made a bit of money to better yourself, you should send your children to private school. And I went to 2 boarding schools. The second one was called Berkhamsted, and I spent the entire time there trying to get out. It was at a time when the world was really changing, and private schools were not where you wanted to be as a young teenager. And I managed to persuade my dad when I was 16 to leave after what were O-levels then, and go to a local college in St Albans and do my A-levels, which I did. And that's kind of changed my life, actually. That's when I suddenly met all my friends. There was a good art school in St Albans, and I met a lot of friends there, still lifelong friends. And that kind of changed my life. That and, the various recreational drugs that were available or you wanted to try and find at those days. And then I did as little as possible as I could at college, and just gave up before my A-levels.
Right.
And I didn't think it was. There was too much else going on at the time. It was an exciting time, and it was not a time that you worried about what you were going to do in the future. This is kind of the late 60s. So it was an exciting time to be young.
So was there an interest in design already developing at this stage?
What I did want to be was a photographer. I'd been taking pictures and processing pictures at home since I was about 14. And it was something I tried to do. I tried to get into to work with a photographer. I did work with a photographer for a bit as a teenager. And I wanted to get into that or films, but it didn't happen. But it was, I was interested in art, and I had lots of friends who were either musicians or artists in one way or the other. So I was immersed in that kind of world, but not able to kind of be good enough to strike out and do something on my own. So I kind of fell into being became an antique dealer, I suppose. More by chance, more on the basis that I wanted to find a way of earning a living without actually having to get a job or be a part of it was very much sort of them and us then. There was, the alternative society, which I think is how we used to describe ourselves. There was an underground, and I was kind of a part of that, of IT Magazine, art events in London. And so there wasn't a great urge to want to get a job, a traditional job. So I found myself selling some old photographs that I collected. I used to pick up photographs at markets and things. Then I found myself so I used to go and do markets selling my photographs and old photographs. And then as I went round various places, like along the south coast, because I had a girlfriend down in Brighton, I'd visit auction houses and junk shops, and I started to just instinctively buy things. I had a truck. I had a big old, what was called British Road Services truck, like a 7-ton truck, and I'd find myself at auctions and nobody would be buying something, and I would just say, put my hand up, and I'd end up buying a wardrobe or a dining table, and I would take it up to Portobello Road. And on Saturday I had a stall down Portobello Road, and I would sell things. And just gradually I started to buy things that I liked, which tended to be arts and crafts, early 20th century stuff. And I kind of educated myself. I started to buy books, secondhand books, and find out what this stuff was. And gradually kind of immersed myself in early 20th century design, more by default than anything else, I suppose. And found that I really enjoyed buying and selling these things and finding things. And then I eventually got a little shop in Hollywood Road selling vintage stuff, what we call vintage stuff now, and started to focus in on a lot of tubular steel furniture. There was, it was that kind of, that whole modernist thing was very interesting to me then.
Right.
And I used to so I started to buy tubular steel furniture as well, which then led me on to eventually how I ended up making furniture.
Well, I was going to ask you about this because SCP really was founded on repairing, but also intriguingly kind of copying classics I've read.
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, there wasn't much interest in the UK with the kind of things I was selling. I was mainly selling to dealers who had shops in Berlin and in Paris and in America. But these weren't serious antiques. These were people like me who were buying kind of alternative. This is alternative to modern furniture. It was a cheaper way of buying something which was interesting. So you could buy a tubular steel dining chair for 10 quid, and I might sell it for £20, and it might happen to be designed by Marcel Breuer. I mean, it was not. That was kind of lower down the list. When I was first starting, it was really just a matter of, is that a nice chair that you could actually use in your home and is relatively well priced? But gradually I started to mix with other people, and you do inevitably when you find things out that certain things are more valuable than others. But at that stage, if I had a chair which was rusty, I'd get it re-chromed, because why would you want a rusty chair in your house? You might as well, if you can restore it, restore it. So I started to restore second-hand tubular steel, and then I realized that actually, the company that made a lot of the British stuff was a company called Pell, and they still existed, and I phoned them up, and I went up to their factory, and they were quite amused by it, but they were closing down. Tubular steel, Pell was a massive company which was shrinking after the war. So I bought a lot of old original pieces from various buildings that they were shutting down, which I then took down to London and sold. And eventually I said, well, I thought, if I'm restoring this stuff, why don't I just make it from new? Because there'd be no difference. It would be exactly the same. And I asked Pell if they would mind if I did this. And again, they was more amused by the idea that anybody would actually want to make anything that they designed 30 years ago or 40, 50 years ago. So yes, I launched a very small range of English Pell tubular steel furniture, mainly a chair by a designer called Leopold Quittner, which is a stacking chair. Okay. The chair that you see at Wimbledon, or they used to use at Wimbledon, the chair with the canvas seat. Yeah.
Okay. You kind of quoted it, I can't remember which article it was in, but saying that you're able to sell a good quality Corbusier shares to someone who'd never think of buying an official one.
That's a bit further down the line. That was that was by the time I got to Curtain Road,
Right.
and opened the store in Curtain Road. And yeah, I mean, it's the as I was kind of learning and working my way through this world that I found myself in. I started to realize that the real classic pieces of the modernist period were mainly people by designs by Eileen Gray or by Charlotte Perrier and or Marcel Breuer or Mies van der Rohe, and they were not made in the UK, and they and they were, some of it was still being made, but they were extremely expensive. And I managed to find a company in Italy that made exactly the same things as all the others. In fact, using the same factories as a lot of the people like Cassina and Knoll used, but selling it at a reasonable price, not at this kind of what I thought were crazy prices. So, yeah, we were selling Corbusier chaise longues or Charlotte Perrin chaise longues for, I don't know, £400 as opposed to £1,800.
Yeah.
But there was no difference. There was really no difference, and I felt at the time, and well, it's a whole nother world. I felt that Cassina had invented a kind of monopoly, which they were ending up turning out elitist furniture, and I thought, well, I'd like to democratize this. And at one point, Habitat were buying them off. Well, Conran were buying them from me, Conran shop, and then Habitat were buying them. So there were, there was one of the great chairs that was designed in the early 20th century being sold through Habitat to people who probably never heard of Charlotte Perrin or Corbusier, but they were buying it because they liked it and the price was right, which I totally justified everything I did at the time.
Presumably, when you see these campaigns that pop up periodically, I know Elle Decoration did one in about 2012 against copying in design. It must produce a wry smile.
It kind of annoyed me, actually, and it's not a subject I often bring up with fellow designers that I work with, because everybody gets hot under the collar about it, and I totally understand. But when something, my view was, and I don't want to kind of enter into a kind of big argument with people. My view was that the law that used to be was that when a product that could be commercially produced and wasn't patentable had been out in the market for 15 or 20 years under a exclusive license. After that time, surely it should fall into the public domain, and anybody should be able to make it at a reasonable price. And that was the logic that I stuck to. And until the law was changed, which was only a couple of years ago, which was lobbied by guess who, the big, the Cassinas, the Knowles of this world, they managed to change the law in the EU and extend the copyright now to 70 years after the death of the designer, which is great for designers.
Have people copied SCP's designs?
They do, and I stop them if I can.
Fair enough.
But it's design copyright is quite interesting, and in America it's very open. It's very. I mean, I think it would be virtually impossible to put a copyright on Jasper's design, Jasper Morrison's designs, or some of the minimalist designs. But it's kind of gone as far as I'm. That was, in a way, at the time, it was a means to an end for me to make the other part of the business that I was developing, which was working with designers, pay for itself.
Yeah, as you've said, you started out in Westbourne Grove, but you set up SCP in Shoreditch, East London, in 1985. Why there?
Because the chrome plater that I used to use to re-chrome all the old pieces of PAL was in Rivington Street in Shoreditch, and so I would be driving over there, once a week to pick up stuff, and sure, it was a desolate place then, but pretty much like it is today, I should think, under the virus cloud that we live. Shoreditch was one of the furniture making districts the furniture making district of London around the city. It was furniture and shoes, and up till the Second World War, most of the buildings in Shoreditch were related to the furniture industry in one way or the other, whether they were veneer suppliers, whether they were ironmongers or tool shops or workshops. But after the Second World War, most of them had disappeared and gone out of business. By the time I was going there in the early 80s, there were still a few businesses left, and this engineering company that made tubular steel furniture, as it happened, were still there, and they were one of the few crown platers in London. So that's how I got to know the area. And every time I went over there, I would look at it and think, this is a really interesting. It was like I'd been to New York in the 70s to Soho, and it was very reminiscent of what Soho was like then. Big, beautiful Victorian industrial spaces, or turn of the century industrial spaces, completely empty. And in those days, obviously New York was ahead of what happened in Shoreditch in terms of artists moved in illegally and started to trade and live there. And that's what I kind of entered that world in Shoreditch just as it was about to start.
And why this change from selling classics to making pieces from young designers?
Because Matthew Hilton came and knocked at my door one day, actually. And no, that was partly it. I quite liked it, but I met a guy I was selling the tubular steel stuff to in Paris. When I went to visit him in Paris, he took me for a drink at the Café Coste, which was Philippe Starck's first major project in Paris, and it was a Café Coste. And when I walked in there, for the first time, I really looked at contemporary furniture, and I thought, wow, this is, I felt this really strong connection between what I was doing with the modernist thing and the furniture that Starck originally designed with Balzac Italia.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this was interesting, and I got hold of the company in Italy, Balzac Italia, and I asked if I could sell their furniture in London, and they said yes. And that's at the same time I'd just taken on the space in Curtain Road to use as a kind of warehouse, really, as a place to put stuff. And I ended up having a kind of party and launching the Philippe Starck's furniture there. So that was kind of my first introduction to contemporary. And then from that, Matthew came to the party, actually. And Jasper, Morrison, who I already knew when I had my shop in Westbourne Park Road, he used to sell me books.
Jasper used to sell you books?
Yeah. Well, I think there was a bookshop called David Batterham, who was a book dealer. I don't know if he's still around, actually. And Jasper used to wander in, and he used to sell me, interesting studio annuals or, modernist, the period books from early 20th century. I don't think, he was still at the Royal College. He wasn't a book dealer. He wasn't a kind of book runner, but I think there was just a way of getting to know each other, or he just happened to be buying books for himself. I'm not sure.
Was he a good salesman?
Well, you know what he's like. He's got a good patter, isn't he? you have to tell him to shut up all the time. He goes on and on. I can't remember. But so yeah, I mean, it was the day after the party. Matthew came round and introduced himself and showed me some of the designs, and then it was very rapid because 100 yards away was a little engineering factory that could make the furniture. So it just kind of started like that, with no real logic of what I was going to do with it, but it just seemed the right thing to do.
Yeah. So can you paint a picture for us and the listeners? It's 1985. Memphis was launched in Milan 4 years earlier. What did the British design scene look like at the time?
Well, put it from my perspective, I really hadn't joined it, I suppose. But I don't. There really wasn't very much of one, or if there was this new generation that of people like Tom Dixon, of Ron Arad, Andre Dubray, Mark Brazier-Jones, Matthew, and Jasper, who were all kind of coming through. Either just come through art school or had recently come through it, and I think there was a kind of a general feeling that Britain was still the poor man of Europe, sick man of Europe, and the really people in the UK bought antiques. They didn't buy contemporary furniture. The only kind of contemporary design that was going on might be in architecture, and that would be in commercial buildings, not in domestic. And everybody looked towards Italy. So I think, I mean, I suppose the designers will speak for themselves, but there wasn't much market for them to join, and a lot of designers were designer makers. In fact, I think all those people I mentioned were designer makers, or designers, and then they would get things made, as it were. There was no industry to join as such. So I kind of fitted into that scene, I suppose. And I think I kind of fell. Like I fell into a lot of things in my life. I think I just kind of fell into it through the story of how I'd got to Curtain Road. So to me, selling modern furniture was like selling the vintage stuff. I immediately thought of the people I sold to in Germany and in America and in France, but I didn't know how to sell it. So I suppose the customers I did have in the UK were mainly architects. Were architects either buying things for themselves, or if possible persuading commercial clients to have a bit of contemporary furniture or a caboose chaise longue in their buildings. And then, so it was pretty barren. We were warm beer and cricket, I think was how John Major described us. I can't remember.
Yes, no, he did.
Yeah.
I mean, the scene, it always seems to me that it felt quite small. Everybody seemed to know each other. Peter Saville did your logo. And how did that happen, for instance?
He wandered into my shop in Westbourne Grove one day and said I needed a logo, and was I prepared to sell him an old Pell desk, I think it was, that I just re-lacquered myself. I said, well, why not? And I got to know him. In fact, I worked with him for a long time, for right up to when he joined Pentagram, I think. So it was a very small scene. It was a kind of an underground. I mean, it was like a lot of the things that were going on in those days with music and fashion. There was this British underground, which eventually kind of escaped from the UK into the rest of the world. And I think in the design world, it was more a way of defense, because there was no market. Like I said before, there was no industry for people to go into. So we just kind of made it up ourselves.
I mean, obviously you weren't doing it for the money, Sheridan, at this point, or at any point, I'm guessing.
Well, you always need money. But I guess, I don't know, I had a capacity to live within whatever means I had, and it never really bothered me. I somehow managed to find the money to make a new design, but I never had a serious plan. I never had a serious ambition to even eventually have an exit strategy. It was what I did. It wasn't a means to an end.
Yeah.
I was a late developer, basically.
I mean, you once said that Shoreditch shaped the character of the company. Can I ask what you meant by that?
Did I? Okay. Well, I'm not sure what I meant. I mean, by being in Shoreditch, I behaved in a certain way, but perhaps I went to Shoreditch because I wanted to behave in a certain way. I mean, it was, the rent was nothing. You had, there were no great expectations of anything or anybody. I would sit there on a Saturday and not expect anybody to ever walk in the door. Like I said, I opened it really more as a place to have stuff and to make stuff and put it in boxes and give it to people. So it just organically grew into what it became. I never really had a structure or a plan.
Yeah.
Ashamedly, I suppose. But maybe that's why I'm still here.
There's a lovely quote from the writer Nick Compton in a profile of you in Hole and Corner magazine, where he compared you to Terence Conran. And he said that Conran was a natural retailer who also wanted to make things, whereas you made things and also wanted to retail. I mean, do you agree with that?
Yes, but I did like retailing. I mean, it was something. It was always in the back of my mind. I really wanted to have a shop so I could sell Leatherman tools, and I could sell, Mont Blanc pens, and I can sell Japanese gardening tools, just things that I liked, and I liked people coming in and buying stuff too. And there was another big difference between me and Terence Conran. I never had a great ambition to accumulate huge amounts of money, but that took a long time to open up the retail side. But if it comes back to basics, I prefer to make stuff.
Yeah. I seem to remember Matthew Hilton telling me that Conran was hugely important in the success of the Balzac. As we say, he designed in '91. I think, was it Conran you saw at Cologne and then sales took off?
Yes. In fact, the very first business I ever did with them was when I was in Westbourne Grove, and Priscilla, his sister, bought some old Pell desks from me, and a couple of old drinks trolleys, and she encouraged me to she said, well, why don't you start to make these things? She was really good, Priscilla, actually. I really liked her. So she kind of got me into Conran. And then, I think Matthew's right. I think Terence did see it at the Milan Fair. And yeah, they were really helpful to me in many ways. Sadly, we don't do any business with them anymore. I don't know why, but.
And how important was Balzac to the company?
It was the first piece of upholstery that we tried to make, and that it was very important because, apart from the fact it was a great design, it was very different from what was on the market. It did start to sell quite well. It took 2 years actually to sell one. Actually, that was quite interesting.
Really, 2 years? Wow.
Yeah. When Matthew said that Terence saw it in Milan, but it might have been 2 years after we made the first one, or it took them 2 years for them to buy one after that. It took a long time, but it got me into upholstery, and it made me realize that upholstery was something that we could do easily and we were good at, and it was perfect for my kind of profile in terms of, because you could just make one if you wanted to. You didn't have to commit to making hundreds of things. And the people who made it, when we started to work with them and make other pieces of upholstery, it was just 2 guys who worked out of an old chicken shed in Norfolk, and then they gradually got a bit bigger and had employed 2 more people. But they reached their early 60s and said they were going to retire, and shut the factory. And I just said, well, you're nuts. Well, you can't just shut it. Can I buy it off you? And then stupidly, I had to pay them a huge amount of money to buy it off them. But yeah, so it led me into what we really do, which is make upholstery.
So it seems to me there have been 3 distinct phases of SCP. You had those kind of exciting, explosive early years, which we've talked about, and that was followed by, it seems to me, by a more grown-up period where you're very much in the contract market. Terence Woodgate's public seating seemed to pop up in airports all over the world. And latterly, you've become more interested in craft. When I first saw you stocking Donna Wilson's kind of very patterned, feminine work, it came as quite a shock. Have all these step changes been deliberate?
Well, they kind of just dawn on me. It's a gradual thing. There's no kind of great marketing decision that this is the new market we should get into. It's whether it's through boredom or you just you reach the end of a period of working that you feel you need to move into another area which perhaps has been neglected, or I neglected. I vowed I'd never have a cushion in the shop, and then I started to have the Donna's cushions, and then we decided to do some work together. But things kind of happen. I got on really well with Donna. There was I saw some old Welsh blankets. We found out that there was there were a few mills in Wales that still were able to make these double cloth blankets. So we contacted them, and then we went down and stayed a couple of days down there and had a look at what they did. And then Donna came back and did some designs in it. So things kind of tend to fall into place. And also you kind of get, I suppose the other aspect is that you suddenly realize actually there are much bigger companies who can do what you do better, in a way of better in a way of being successful. So there's only so long you can stay pioneering something before other companies can make it cheaper, which happens all the time. So I suppose that's always going on. But I mean, the airport seating with Terence was a complete accident. That wasn't an intentional step. That was me being stuck in an airport with Jasper, and was stuck in Arlanda Airport in Stockholm with Jasper, and because Heathrow was shut because of snow, and we were kind of laughing about it. And then we were sitting at this airport seating, which in those days was kind of massively big business for big Italian companies. And we both looked at it and thought, well, this is really easy. Anybody could make one of these seats. These aren't that sophisticated. And when I got back to London, I asked Jasper if he would design one, and he said no. And then of course I realised that Terry, who's much more technical, and as an engineer, would be much more suitable. So he and I just did it kind of just to prove a point, and then we took it to Orcotech, and Foster's happened to see it, and it was a kind of, again, one of those lucky breaks. We didn't make much money out of it. We didn't pursue it because it was something you had to really industrialize for, and it was not something that interested me to go into big business that way.
I mean, working with all these different designers, presumably you have to work with them all in a different way, I take it.
Yes, but it's the designers I've worked with. I mean, I guess that they must be of a type because they want to work with me. Some, they all work in different ways. Some don't even really listen to what you're talking about and just present you with the design, and there it is. And with a perfect drawings with all the components, and you just go away and get it priced, and you either make it or you don't. Other designers like feedback, like to work with me and kind of have my influence on something, and other designers just do a kind of sketch, and then we have to go away and do all the technical stuff for them. It's but I suppose that there must be a willingness on their part to want to work with such a small company as us, not many of them, I would say, can live off the royalties. Most of them then go and work for other companies where they can probably be more commercially successful. That's not to say that that's what our business is about. So we are generating good sums of money in terms of royalties for designers, but most designers usually come to me in their early days, and then if they're good and they can get spotted, they then go and work for bigger companies where the rewards are greater.
Is there a link, Sheridan, between them all, between Jasper Morrison and Donna Wilson, other than yourself? Is there something that unites them all?
Oh, is there something you know the answer to already?
No, not at all.
I don't know. I don't know. It's I can't answer that question. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. I'd like to think that it's quite a close relationship, and I'm on speaking terms with all of them still, and whether we still work with them or not, and I don't expect all of them to want to work with me now because people's lives change. But I would say that there was a kind of camaraderie and friendship in our world, and I think we're very lucky in the design world in particular that people tend to have good relationships with each other, and they are friendships as well as business relationships. Particularly in that design scene that I came out of the late 80s, and it probably still goes on now amongst newer generations. I mean, obviously, I've been around a long time, so it's quite. I don't really know what's going on anymore in terms of where is the design scene in London now with emerging designers who've graduated in the last 2 or 3 years. Hopefully it's the same as the world I was in at the time, which is, I still think it's a very nice world. I feel really lucky that that I work amongst it and with these people.
So over the years, you've been kind of keen to spread into other parts of the capital. You had a store in Westbourne Grove, which I think opened in 2007. What happened with that?
It just didn't work. It was. It's funny. I thought East London is East London is a long way from West London, and as the shop turned into a real shop in Curtain Road, I realised that there were lots of people who were coming over from West London to buy things, and London's a big place, and I thought, well, why don't I go back to where I used to have my old shop? My old shop was in Westbourne Park Road. So but I thought Westbourne Grove, which used to be back in the day, the great street where all the antique shops were. And we opened a beautiful shop. And I was hoping, I just wanted to sell furniture there, but it just didn't work. So we put in accessories and lighting, and it was successful, but it was not as successful as I wanted it to be, really. It ended up being quite hard work. And then rent review came along, the landlord virtually doubled the rent. So I just thought, well, let's call it a day.
But now you have this spot on Pimlico Road. So
yeah,
why
which is
there? Why now?
Over the last sort of, I suppose, 5-10 years, I've noticed that our market has become fuller and fuller, and there are lots of companies, able companies now, who are able to produce modern furniture. Modern furniture is now the norm. It's whereas back when I first started, it wasn't. So everybody caters for that modern market, and it's highly competitive. There are endless companies who can get the look very quickly from after going to Milan. So it's highly competitive, and I just thought I can't have this race to the bottom. There's no point me doing this. If I come up with a new design and make 100 of them, somebody else can do something very similar but make 1,000 at half the price, which is fine. Which is what I like to see in the furniture world in terms of being able to give people products at the right price. So gradually we've moved away, going the other direction, which is, I sell a lot of things in America, and so on my visits to America, I was noticing this whole kind of new American craft movement that had been occurring for the last sort of 10 years, of particularly in lighting and in furniture, very independent, a bit like the British scene was in the 80s, has been kind of developing in America. But in America, they can do things in a much more confident way, in a much more businesslike way. So we started to bring over some of this very expensive handmade lighting from companies like Rowland Hill and Apparatus.
Yeah.
And it started to work over here. The architects and interior designers, were finding it was fitting an area that they wasn't being covered by anybody else. We started to do the same with furniture, which was to go up as opposed to go down, to make things, to add value to a product, to justify why it costs more. Of course, your market kind of shrinks in terms of who your audience is, and in the UK for this kind of either one-off or limited production furniture or craft pieces tends to be high-end residential, and the high-end residential market is based in West London, and Pimlico Road has always been the street where the best antique. In my day, when I was an antique runner going around, with things in the back of my car trying to flog them to other dealers, Pimlico Road was the best street for that, and it still is, but it's changed. It's now much more. A lot of contemporary stores down there, Pinch's down there, Rosuniaki is down there. So we opened up a little shop there last year, and found, to cater for this market that probably haven't even heard of Shoreditch, let alone go there. It's been quite successful until we had to shut. So, it's another world, but in a way, it's enabling me to do what I think more interesting things. That we could do the ceramics of Flores Vubin, which, they're not cheap, but we can put them in the store there, and people luckily can come in and buy them. So it's and we've done one-off shows with Reiko Kaneko ceramics, which we probably wouldn't have done in Curtain Road. So it's opening up a new world, really, which is kind of a return backwards in a way for me, in terms of going down more the sort of the more small production run.
Yeah. So I've seen you described as the rock star of the British design industry.
I'm not. That's Tom Dixon. You're thinking.
Well, it's out there. It's in print. or on another occasion as its grandee. there was quite an in-jokey show at Somerset House a few years ago that Carl Clerkin co-curated called the Learned Society of Extraordinary Objects that cast you as the kind of society's head.
Yes.
I'm interested in how you see yourself.
Oh, well, I don't see. No, I think Zeph Aram is more the kind of grandfather of British design, I think, more so than Terence Conran. He was the guy who really introduced modern furniture to the UK, I think, in the 60s. I just happened to be around at the right time, I think, and was very lucky that I've been able to, it all just kind of fell into place. It would be nice that people think I'm nice, and I've done the right thing. Hopefully, I do more right things than wrong things. But I don't regard myself as a grandee. I also don't regard myself as old. That's the other thing, which is very difficult.
I don't know why I'm laughing at that.
to come to terms with. Yeah.
So we're coming to the end, Sheridan. You'll be glad to know. But I'm interested to find out. I mean, obviously, we're in this extraordinary situation at the moment, but maybe before that, where do you think the British design industry is?
I think I said before, I'm not quite sure what's going on with the newer generation, a younger generation of designers who've emerged in the last sort of 5 years from design schools and things. And maybe they can tell you where it's going to go. But I do feel that it's a bit of a vacuum. I mean, I said before that I thought I was lucky to have been around at the right time, at the right place. But it does seem slightly dull at the moment. I mean, I think it would be interesting to think that, well, there's been a great resurgence in craft, which I know you've been involved with. And in parallel, there's been the designer maker thing that's been happening in America too. So I think there is a kind of resurgence in some ways, and I think there's an opportunity for designers who, perhaps in the old days, would think they could get a job in industry. There's an opportunity for them to get a job by making things themselves or working with more like galleries on the kind of collector's level. I can't imagine an industry coming back over here, but maybe, who knows, with the way things are, I mean, maybe that's going to be encouraged, that we should be more self-sufficient again. And Britain is a nation of engineers. There's some fantastic engineering companies that can make things. Why can't they make competitive furniture?
Do you think the best design minds, young design minds, want to go into furniture now? I mean, you can go around the graduate shows and not see a stick of furniture nowadays.
Well, I don't blame them, and I would not encourage anybody to. Whenever a batch of students come round to, whether we're setting the brief or something, I always try and, I'm not being rude or jokey about it. I just say, don't have ambitions to be a furniture designer. You're a designer. There's lots of ways you can apply your mind to things differently that other people can't do, and whatever it is that talent you have, you don't feel you have to produce something physically. There's lots of ways that you can apply yourself, but at the same time, we still need stuff, don't we? People feel good with stuff around them, so hopefully there will be designers who will still want to make things. But I can understand. I mean, it goes in it. Again, you probably had a better view about it than I do, but being a furniture designer was very fashionable. It became a fashion for quite a long time, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the only thing that designers have is a sexy thing to do anymore. There's lots of other things you can do.
And finally, Sheridan, I'm sure you've got things to do. This is the final question. What are your future plans? You're not going to retire anytime soon, are you?
Well, I'm kind of like forced retirement at the moment, and although I'm not, I spent more time in front of a computer in the last couple of weeks trying to sort out how we go forward. No, I'm not. I mean, I think it's going to be interesting, I suppose, to put it in one way, but it's going to be quite hard, I think, coming out of this for a lot of people. And I think lots of companies are taking a kind of cold look about the way they do things. Everybody is. And, you could turn that round as a positive, that it will make people do things differently in the future. I mean, I don't know. It's funny, over the last 9 months, I've been wondering whether I should change the way we retail anyway. And we've been thinking about whether actually we need to be in Curtain Road, whether we priced ourselves out of that area, and that we should be doing more online, and we should have we should relocate to a place which is more of a destination. So it's always been in the back of my mind to possibly remodel the way we do things. But I still want to carry on making stuff, and I've got a factory in Norfolk with 25 people up there who've got fantastic skills, and that there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't continue to be making stuff that people can buy in the UK and abroad.
Very good. Well, Sheridan, that's a lovely place to leave it.
Okay,
thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, a pleasure. It's a pleasure to get away from this computer I'm stuck in front of. Yeah. Hopefully go and do some early retirement gardening over the weekend.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Grant.
And good luck when we all get out of this.
Yeah. Good luck to everybody. Yeah. Really. Yeah. Let's hope we do.
And to learn more about Sheridan and SCP, go to scp.co.uk. There are images from the interviews, as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. If you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from. And if you feel so inclined, you can go to my Patreon page and make a pledge at patreon.com/material matters. You'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope you're all staying safe.